Okay, welcome back, everybody. After what Mario says is a month.
But who's counting?
Well, you're keeping track. Well, that means we had plenty of time to review side 2A, 2B, 3A. I'm sure we know it really, really well. And now we're moving along. We're on page 3B. In the Steinsaltz Koren Talmud, we're on page 207. Or if you're using the original Talmud or the Yad Scroll, we are... How many times lines from the top? We're about, where are we? About 12 lines from the top. So we're Amar Rava. Okay, let's summarize. What have we spoken about? We've spoken most recently about weighing out preferences between what mitzvah overrides another mitzvah. Okay? So we are focused on Megillah because that is our topic. So we said that we put Megillah versus Avodah versus worship in the temple, and we said which one overrides which? Megillah. What was the proof for that? So that was the proof from the Passcode in the Megillah. It said, "V'chol mishpacha o mishpacha," every single family. What's the redundancy of mishpacha o mishpacha? So we said every mishpacha, even the Kohen and the Levi mishpacha, who may be worshiping in the temple, it's their time. But when it comes to the reading of the Megillah, they stop, they leave the temple, and they go and attend the Megillah reading. Then we said, what about Torah study and Megillah? Which one comes first? Which one overrides the other? Megillah. What was the proof of that? The proof of that wasn't so much a proof, but it was a way of deduction. It was a kal v'chomer from the yeshiva of Rebbe that said that Torah study is not as chomor, is not as strong as the mitzvah of avodah in the temple, worship in the temple. And the proof of that, we brought the whole story. No, that was the question. The story of Yeshua was the question. But basically, we brought a proof that avodah is more strict than Torah studies. If avodah is overridden by the Megillah, how much more so Torah studies also overridden by the Megillah? And we explored, it wasn't so simple, different kinds of Torah study, and good evening. And there was some proofs that seemed to suggest otherwise. For example, Yeshua, remember when this person came to approach Yeshua and he said he did two things wrong. A, you did not offer the sacrifice in the temple, and B, you didn't study Torah tonight because at nighttime they weren't fighting the war. So Yeshua said, well, what is the main crime main sin that you've come here for now? He said, well, I'm coming now for the lack of Torah study, which seems to imply lack of Torah study is worse than no worship in the temple. So we made a distinction between Torah study of an individual and Torah study of the masses. And Torah study of the masses is maybe more strict, but not Torah study of the individual. Anyhow, we're not going to review all that, but you remember all that, right? Okay, now we're up to page 207, Amar Rava. So now Rava is going to take us on a new journey. Again, weighing out different mitzvahs, different very important ones, which one is more important than the other. In other words, we always want to be able to fulfill all the mitzvahs possible. But bear in mind that there is no human being in the world that can fulfill every single one of the 613 mitzvot, simply because some of them are for males distinctively, some of them are for females distinctively, some of them are for Kohanim, some of them are for Levim, etc., etc. So if you're not a Kohen, you can't do all the mitzvot that the Kohanim get. So this is an interesting concept. We always think about how we have to do all the mitzvot that we can, but there's no person that can ever fulfill all 630 mitzvot, which explains something very important. It tells us, number one, how dependent we are on each other, because we're all sort of complementing each other. And number two, you can get into the Kabbalistic concept of reincarnation that tells you in this lifetime, maybe you're not going to fulfill all the mitzvot, but in all of your lifetimes, hopefully, that's the way Hashem designs it, your soul, or at least some kind of incarnate of your soul, comes back as a Kohen, comes back as a Levi, comes back as a man, comes back as a woman, etc., etc. Right? One of the mitzvahs is to do a get. Not everyone does the get. Hopefully, most people don't need to do the get. Then once you give a get to your wife, if you ever did that, there's a mitzvah to remarry your wife.
And that's one of the 613?
Yeah.
Giving a get?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. In other words, I don't want to put it.
Have a get if you were with a non-Jewish woman?
No, you don't do a get. No, because that's not a marriage.
All right. Okay. I like it.
So that person doesn't get that mitzvah. I don't want to put
That's
any
all
thoughts
right.
in your head, Johnny. But there's
okay.
there's a category of
Next one.
Chas v'shalom. Never. There's a category of mitzvot that are not so much chiyuv, obligatory, but more mitzvah. In other words, if you're going to go ahead and do something, then the mitzvah describes this is the way you should do it. For example, who can think of some examples? I mean, get is one example. If you're going to get divorced, do it through the process of get, but you don't have to get divorced. Teshuvah is a very interesting example because who says that teshuvah is even one of the 613 mitzvot? According to the Rambam, it is not.
Isn't that because it counts vidui?
Vidui, correct. Yeah. So that you're saying that there's no vidui without teshuvah.
I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah. Good point. But vidui is a component of teshuvah, but it's not the essence of teshuvah. But yeah. What's another example? Think of an example, tzitzis. If you're not wearing a four-corner garment, you don't have to put any strings on, right? If you're going to wear a four-corner garment, then the mitzvah to put on tzitzit. If you're not planning on eating any meat, you don't have to shech any animals. But if you're planning on eating meat, this is the way you do the mitzvah, you shech the animal. And there's many such examples, right? Where are we? Okay, so we try to do all the mitzvot. Now, that being said, one last time we said you can't. And another point is that sometimes one mitzvah is in conflict with the other. You can't do both. You could do one or the other, right? So then we have to start to weigh up which one overrides the other. Or there's even a concept that says ha'isek b'mitzvah potem in mitzvah. Someone who's involved in engaging in one mitzvah is exempt from another mitzvah. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons perhaps why women are exempt from many mitzvot, because one of their main mitzvot is to be the akeret habayit, to be the foundation of the home, and to take care of the family and the children and their education. And because of that, they are exempt from many other, time-bound mitzvahs, etc., because they're engaging one mitzvah, they don't have to do another mitzvah. That's one of the reasons, according to some. So here we're going to discuss many conflicts. So Amar Rava says, Pshitali, the following few cases are going to be obvious cases, ones that I don't have any questions about. Soon you're going to hear all of my questions, says Rava. What's obvious to me? Pshita, from the word pashut. It's simple, it's obvious. Avoid the Mikra Megillah and follow, because there's a calculation going on over here. There's logic how we're going to build this up. So if you have on one side avoid the worship in the temple, and on the other side the obligation to read the Megillah, so which one comes first? So we say, so Mikra Megillah adif. Megillah comes first, and that we already established. Midir Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, like the teaching we learned earlier from Rabbi Yosef and Chanina, and the teaching was that it was learned out from Mishpacha from the verse in the Megillah. Okay, that we know. Also, it's obvious if you have Talmud Torah against Mikra Megillah, reading of the Megillah. You're studying Torah, and then it comes time to read the Megillah. Which one comes first? Mikra Megillah adif. We said Megillah comes first. Why? Because we already learned this. Rebbe said it's a kal v'chomer. If Megillah overrides the avodah, the worship in the temple, then Megillah for sure overrides the studying of Torah. So far, Megillah is, if you have to do a hierarchy out of these three, what will be on top? Megillah. Next would be Avodah, and next would be Talmud Torah. Good. Let's continue. Talmud Torah meis mitzvah. Let's say on one side you're studying Torah, on the other side you're faced with the mitzvah of meis mitzvah. What is meis mitzvah? Somebody has died, and there is no relatives. Sadly, this happens. No known relatives, and there's nobody to take care of their burial. And so now it becomes an obligation and a mitzvah on the community, on anybody or everybody who finds out about this, to go ahead and help with their burial. It's called a meis mitzvah. So now you're studying Torah, and all of a sudden you see somebody lying on the road dead, and there's nobody who knows them, and they have no relatives in the world. Do you continue studying Torah, or do you go and help with their burial? What do? So it says Rava, meis mitzvah adif. The mitzvah of meis mitzvah is a very enormous mitzvah. It's actually going to override a lot of things, as we're going to see, and it definitely overrides the studying of the Torah. How do we know this? We have a clear source. What is the source? Meditanya. We learned it in a Brisa teaching. The Brisa says, Mevatlin Talmud Torah, we cancel our Torah study, lo yitzos hames, when you, for the sake of honoring and escorting a dead person to their burial, and for the purpose of escorting a bride to her chuppah. So that's about, it could be its permission for all dead people, meaning all funerals, not just a meis mitzvah. How much more so a meis mitzvah? Yes, you interrupt Torah study to go to a levaya, to go to a funeral. It's called escorting the dead. It's a very big mitzvah. Similarly, escorting the bride and groom. Now, I mean, it's one thing if the bride and groom have 1,000 guests, etc. Then maybe your presence doesn't add too much, or they don't even know you. But especially in there are some of these very small weddings, or a wedding of an orphan, or whatever. I remember we were in yeshiva, so in New York, in Al Torah, so our zal, our base medrash, our study hall, was on the top floor, and then on an adjacent building is a wedding hall. There's weddings there every single night of the year, pretty much, except for between in the Omer and those kinds of. So sometimes we would get somebody would come, and we would be maybe learning at 9:30 at night, and somebody would say, there's someone getting married down there, and there's nobody there. It's an empty crowd. It's not nice. We want to rent a crowd. So we bought him. That was exciting for us, right? We put on our shoes, tucked ourselves in, and you get us some food over there. And 30 guys, 40 guys rock in, and for half an hour, for an hour, just make up the dance floor and bring some simcha. So that was a big mitzvah.
So that's what it means. Escorting the bride is just.
It can mean different things, but any component of adding. There's a mitzvah to be misameach chasan v'kala, a mitzvah to bring joy to a chatan and kala. It's such a big mitzvah that the Gemara says. The Gemara records different practices of different sages, how they would go out of their way to be misameach chatan v'kala. So one of the sages was Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Eloi, and what he would do, nowadays when you go to weddings. I know for sure the frum weddings, but maybe others as well. You have the guy that's the juggler, and the guy that puts his head on fire, and the guy that puts the bottle on his head, and the guy that puts the chair on his nose. Right? You have all these people. So Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Eloi, he had this trick. He would juggle myrtle branches. Now he had some colleagues like Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera was very disappointed. It's one thing if the bacher from yeshiva, the simple guy. You go out there and you do it. Yeah, it's expected of you. That's what you do. But the big Rosh Hashiva is supposed to just, walk around and tap lightly and do a bit of dancing and carry a prominent role. But to go in there and start juggling and making a fool of yourself. So he said, you're bringing disrespect to the rabbinate. But in the end, there's a whole story, but they found out he was 100% right. But there's no such thing as disrespecting yourself or the rabbinate or anybody when it comes to fulfilling a mitzvah, like escorting the bride or groom at their chuppah, at their wedding. What's a harder thing to do? To participate in a shiva or participate in a wedding?
Depends what your personality is.
Depends who's wedding.
Right? To get on that dance floor and just dance away, or to sit there and commiserate with a mourner. Which one is harder?
I stick by my answer. Depends who you are.
Wedding.
Michael says a wedding.
No, I'd rather be in the wedding.
Huh?
I'd rather be in the wedding.
No, the funeral.
Rather be at a wedding, right. But are you able to just let go of yourself and dance like crazy? Is that easy for you? Or, I go to a lot of weddings and a lot of people just will sit there at the table and talk, whatever. Fine, nice, but you're not actually being misamech hasamekala. You're not doing the mitzvah right now. There's a mitzvah to get on that dance floor and go nuts to bring energy to this wedding. That's the mitzvah.
You forgot about the spark.
Yeah.
You got to bring the spark.
Yes.
Bring it.
Yes, you do.
Even if most of those people are thinking in a place where, my marriage, all these years, and then the women sitting, and they're gonna have 7 kids, and she's gonna have 9 kids.
I hope Faye's not listening to you right now.
No. So, but I'm sure that they look around and they go, wow, okay. This is great. You know what she's getting into.
Michael, I want to go to a wedding with you. That's for sure. Okay, let's continue. So if it's Torah versus Meis Mitzvah comes first. What about Avodah or Meis Mitzvah? You're a Kohen worshiping in the temple, and all of a sudden you see a Meis Mitzvah, the dead person needs your attention. Which one comes first? Meis Mitzvah comes first. So in other words, it's one thing if it's more powerful than Torah study. That's the lower level. That doesn't tell me anything about Avodah, which is the higher level. So it's even higher, even more powerful than avodah. How do we know? From the word v'la'achoisoi. V'la'achoisoi means and his sister. What is it talking about? So I want to introduce to you the pasuk over here so you know what we're talking about. It's a pasuk. I only have one, so I'm going to hold it up. Yeah, it's a pasuk that talks about the Nazir. Okay? No, you can't see it because the green screen is like blocking it out. You're not going to see it. I'm going to read it out for you. So the Nazir is the person who takes upon themselves for a minimum of 30 days, but it could be longer, a period of intense holiness. And they can't drink wines and certain foods, and they grow their hair. And they're like in a state of solitude, a state of teshuvah, a state of distancing themselves from others. They're going through a little journey. And another thing they cannot do is they cannot become impure. They cannot become tamei. So the pasuk says, all the days that he abstains for the Lord, and all the day of being a Nazir, he shall not come into contact with the dead. You cannot become impure. You cannot go to a funeral. You cannot go to a cemetery, etc., etc. The very next pasuk says, not to his father, not to his mother, not to his brother, not to his sister. He shall not defile himself if they die, for the crown of his God is upon his head. Meaning, even a family relative, you can't go to the funeral. You're a Nazir, right? Like Kohen Gadol, for example. Kohen is different, but maybe a Kohen Gadol can't go to any, not even to a mother and father's funeral. Okay, now here's the question. The first pasuk said, "Al nefesh meis lo yavo." You cannot become impure or defile yourself for any dead person. Now, that blanket statement automatically means every person, including his family. For what reason what's the point of the next pasuk to start to itemize mother, father, brother, sister? We wouldn't assume otherwise if the Torah gave a blanket statement that you cannot become tamei to anybody. So that's what the Gemara discusses. So the Gemara says, not here, but the Gemara says, so every word is teaching you something, a special teaching, because everything in the Torah is exact. So from the first word, from your father to your father, it tells me the law that what if, the exception, there's one case when a Nazir can become tamei, and when is that? A meis mitzvah. In other words, not his father, but another father, were that to be not just a regular person, but a meis mitzvah, someone who dies and there's no relatives. So the meis mitzvah is the exception. The Nazir can become impure from a meis mitzvah.
Because of the word.
Because of the extra word that says his father. So the Gemara learns out his father he can become impure too. But there's another father or another category of person he would be able to become impure. And what category is that? Meis mitzvah.
But the pasuk before says with the dead.
The pasuk before says you cannot become impure ever. And if it just would have said the pasuk before, I would have said even for meis mitzvah he cannot become impure. It was a blanket statement. So now the next pasuk, the 4 extra words, are going to be teaching me 4 exceptional laws about the Nazir where he can become impure. First one being meis mitzvah. Yeah.
What if he's an only child and he's the only member of the family, and if he doesn't take care of his father, that's it.
When he finishes being a Nazir, he can mourn, he can grieve. But no. Others, there's a community, there's a mishpacha, there's a community, someone else will take care. You took it upon yourself to become a Nazir. You have to pay the consequences. Okay, so that's what we learn out from the first extra word, father. From the second extra word, mother, we learn out another exceptional case about the Nazir is, what if the Nazir is a Kohen? Now I have a Nazir Kohen, he too can become impure for a meis mitzvah.
And we learn that from mother?
From the extra word. Not from the content of the word mother, but from the existence of the extra word mother. Third exception, brother, extra word. Third exception is, what if the Nazir is a Kohen Gadol? He can also become impure for a meis mitzvah. So, father, mother, brother, we have 3 laws, 3 exceptions of the Nazir. Not regular Nazir for meis mitzvah, Nazir Kohen Gadol. What's the 4th word for? La Choisei, the sister. What is the 4th exception of a Nazir? So the Gemara says the Tanya we learned in the Brayso, V'la Choisei ma tamim loymar. What's this extra word of V'la Choisei? The sister coming to teach us. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you. Hooray! Let's think of the following case. This Nazir, it's Erev Pesach, and he's on his way to the temple with his lamb to slaughter his Pesach offering. Or another example, V'lamalas b'noi. He's on the way to the shul, bringing his son. He's about to give a circumcision to his newborn son. And all of a sudden he hears or he sees that there's a meis mitzvah, there's a dead person with nobody to take care of that person. Yochel yitame. One might have thought that he should return and become ritually impure for the corpse. So Amrat, and then the Torah says, Lo yitame, no, a Nazir cannot become impure. Okay, hold on a minute.
Can you repeat that? I didn't follow that very well.
Okay, but I'm going to bring the two paragraphs together because it's one continuation. So the case is he's going to slaughter a Pesach offering, or he's going to bring his son and give a circumcision. And then he hears about a meis mitzvah. So I may have thought the Torah says, Lo yitame, lo yitame. From the first verse, a blanket statement, you cannot become impure for anything. Yachal, I would have thought, Kashem, Sheni, Mitamala Choisoi. Just like the Nazir has no permission to become impure for the burial, for the funeral of his own sister, then maybe for his own sister, he can't even become impure. Maybe for anybody and for everybody, including the meis mitzvah, he also can't become impure. Therefore, the Torah adds the extra word for his sister to teach me as follows: it's the sister that he can't become impure for. But if it wasn't his sister and it was an extreme, exceptional, extraordinary case, for example, meis mitzvah, you can become impure for a meis mitzvah. In other words, the first extra word of father taught me the case, and Nazir can become impure to a meis mitzvah. He's sitting and doing nothing and playing on his phone. He's playing Wordle. You guys playing Wordle nowadays? Yeah. How you doing with it? Every day you getting it?
So far?
I haven't done it every day, but every day I've done it. Yesterday I got it on the 6th line. Just in time.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're busy playing Wordle. You're a Nazir. A Nazir is playing Wordle. Doesn't make any sense. A Nazir is not playing Wordle. A Nazir is busy praying and studying. Okay. And he sees a meis mitzvah. So the first word is an exception. Go ahead. Become impure for the meis mitzvah. Second word, mother, says, what if the Nazir is a kohen? Still. Third word, father, brother. What if the Nazir is a kohen gadol? Still can become pure. What's the fourth word for? What if the Nazir is on his way to doing a mitzvah, on the way to offering the Pesach offering, and then sees a mitzvah? So we say, yeah, he should become impure and also bury the meis mitzvah. Okay, that's the law.
The Nazir is supposed to be in a cave alone, right?
But he has if the Erev Pesach, he has to go ahead and bring the Pesach offering. He's not exempt from that. He's got to join everyone else.
And what about bris milah?
If he has a son, he has to give him bris milah. He's still got to do what he's got to do. He's not exempt from mitzvahs. To the contrary, he has to do more mitzvahs. He's being more careful about mitzvahs.
Somebody was completely outside.
A Nazir didn't have to leave the camp. It wasn't like a metzora or impure person, but it was a self-imposed kind of restrictive life of taking himself away from the narishkeit of life, from the social mingling aspect of life, because he was being fully devoted and focused on him and his creator. But mitzvahs he has still to do. So this is the fourth exception of the Nazir. If he's on his way to do a mitzvah, it's still right. And what's the issue here? That if he goes ahead and attends the funeral of the meis mitzvah, is going to be impure, and he's not going to be able to offer the Pesach offering. It's an override, right? He's still override it. Now, what's the example? What's the case of the Pesach offering? It's avodah. It's worship in the temple. And we still said that even the Nazir has to attend to the funeral and not offer avodah. No, what's this end? This is the proof that what? For the original question of Rava, if you have avodah and meis mitzvah is stronger. We saw that even by the case of the Nazir. Meis mitzvah is stronger. So meis mitzvah is stronger than Torah study. Meis mitzvah is stronger than avodah, worship in the temple.
But is it stronger than Megillah?
So now begins the question. We have elevated Megillah to the top of the hierarchy. Megillah, then avodah, then Talmud Torah. Separately, we've elevated Meis Mitzvah the top of the hierarchy. Meis Mitzvah and then Avodah and then Megillah. We got two things at the top right now. Meis Mitzvah and Megillah.
Championship.
Now is the championship. Now Rava comes with his question. Mikra Megillah Meis Mitzvah Hai Menaya Adif. If you're on the way to read the Megillah, and all of a sudden you see this dead body, there's nobody to take care. What do you do? And the Gemara explains the question. What are the two sides of the argument? Mikra Megillah Adif, do we say that the reading of the Megillah should take precedence Mishum de Persumin Nisa, because it's such a strong mitzvah of publicizing the miracle of Purim? It's a huge mitzvah to publicize God's awareness and publicize the miracle. That's maybe a reason why Megillah should take precedence. Or Dilma, or perhaps Meis Mitzvah Adif, the bearing of this Meis Mitzvah takes precedence, Mishum Kvoid Abriyos, because there's another very important value in life, in the Torah, called dignity of people, including the dead. We treat the dignity of people, including the dead, very, very seriously, as we're about to find out more. So which one comes first? So that was Rava's question. And Basa the Boya, the Pashti, after he asked the question, he gave his own answer. He's a good teacher. He's setting you up, and then he said, I'll give you the answer. You know the answer is Meis Mitzvah Adif. You don't go here in the Megillah. Instead, you go attend to the funeral. Do Amar Mar, because we have learned a very important principle. Gadol kvoid habriyos shedoiche es lo yisaseh shebetorah. The protecting the dignity of people, of God's creations, is so powerful that it overrides all prohibitions of the Torah. Now, that's a very big statement. What does that mean? What is the extent of protecting the dignity of people, and what can it really override? Let's think of some examples. How could it really override a prohibition of the Torah?
Is that why it doesn't?
Yes.
That's interesting. Overrides a prohibition, but when you're not allowed to override.
So first of all, you should know that there's a dispute amongst the halachists. Does it mean that a kavod habriyos, dignity of people, overrides just rabbinic law, rabbinic prohibitions, or even biblical prohibitions? What's the extent of the power, of the value of respecting the dignity of people? So if you want to bring a source from Al Gemara, Meis Mitzvah, which is protecting the dignity of a person, of a deceased, is overriding what? Reading the Megillah. Reading the Megillah is only a rabbinic law. So from here, all you would know that it's only strong enough to override rabbinic law. You don't know that it's strong enough to override biblical law.
It's also overriding avodah.
It's overriding avodah. Yes, but the argument could be, well, the answer to that could be that it was not based on the principle of kavod habriyos. It was based on a principle that we learned from the Passcode. It was a biblical. In other words, that's how Chazal understood la'achoyse is teaching you that. So it could be it'll be limited and exclusive to this case, but it would not be a broader principle of all kavod habriyos matters overrides biblical law, right?
Kavod habriyos doesn't matter when it comes to, I think, if you have shatnez.
So I want to keep going. Talk about it.
If someone's wearing shatnez in the marketplace or something like that in a public area, you're able to take it off them. If the other like, oh yeah, this is as a woman, and you're able to take it off them.
Okay, so we're going to get into that in a moment. Let's build up. I want to bring you some examples. For sure, according to everybody, kavod habriyos overrides rabbinic law. It's not clear about biblical law. So here's an example from the Gemara in Shabbat. I just wrote some of these down. So there's a prohibition from carrying from a private domain to a outside of the private domain. Now, here in the Gemara, it's talking about not carrying into a public domain, which would be a complete biblical violation, but it's carrying into a karmelis. We've learned about this. A karmelis is like the street over here. It's a quasi-public domain, but it's not really biblically a public domain, because public domain has to be a very busy thoroughfare. So it's a rabbinic public domain. So the Gemara says, even though you're not allowed to carry, but let's say you went to the bathroom, you went to what's those holes at the back of the property called? The outhouse, yeah. Okay, you're there, and all of a sudden you got no toilet paper, and over your property line you see a few loose pebbles which you want to use for toilet paper. Apparently, that's what they used in those days. Yeah. So can you go Michael, sorry that my screen is closed or whoever's there, but you're going to see it soon. I'm just reading from my notes over
All
here.
right.
Can you go and the law is you can go ahead and take those pebbles, carry them over the line and wipe yourself with, because kavod habriot overrides the rabbinic prohibition of carrying from the Carmelists, from the quasi-public domain into the private domain. Yeah, cleanliness, dignity, wiping yourself. Another example. The rabbis enacted a prohibition on a Kohen from approaching a coffin or graveyard to ensure the biblical prohibition on contact with the dead would not be inadvertently violated. So the Kohen doesn't go to the cemetery, etc., etc. But the Gemara in Bracha says that a Kohen can violate this rabbinic prohibition if need be, if a king was passing by and he had to be there to greet the king. Because the mitzvah of greeting a king, which is a matter of kavod habriot, overrides the rabbinic prohibition of not allowing the Kohen to go near the cemetery. Here's another example. Again, going to the bathroom. Tractate Masechta Beitza records an example, a teaching that even though on Shabbat or festivals you are not allowed to build even temporary structures, but if a person was out there on the field and needed to go to the bathroom, and then what they would do is they would create some kind of temporary structure, some outhouse to facilitate their needs. You're allowed to do that on Shabbos and Yom Tov because of kavod habriot.
Now, is that biblical or
No, that's rabbinic. It's a temporary structure.
Okay, temporary is rabbinic.
Yes, building on Shabbos, temporary. But let's think of a biblical example. Let's say you're walking in the street with just one shirt, the only shirt you have, and all of a sudden someone comes to you and says, "Oi, Gewalt! That shirt is shatnez. It's got wool linen. I saw that shirt in the store and I didn't buy it because it was shatnez, and now I see you wearing it." So generally, if you find that you're wearing shatnez, what do you have to do? Whisk it off. But if you're in a home, it's one thing. But I'm in the middle of the mall. I'm in the middle of the street. I'm in the shul. Who knows where? Now what do you do? So if a matter of kavod habriot, we should say, let the person go home and take off their shirt. On the other hand, this is a biblical violation over here. Does kavod habriot override the biblical violation of shatnez? So we have a whole argument about it, and there's a quote in the Shulchan Aruch between the Bet Yosef, the Mechaber, and the Ramah, the Ashkenazic codifier. They have a back and forth about this, because the Mechaber says only if it's rabbinic shatnez, not biblical shatnez, and the Ramah adds no even. So anyhow, there's a whole discussion. It's not a clear matter. There's a famous teshuvah, famous halachic response from the Tzitz Eliezer. He talks about wearing hearing aids on Shabbos. Yeah, and he permits it because of kavod habriot.
Right.
What do you mean?
Why is it covered?
Because it's for your life.
Why what?
Why is it covered?
Why is it kavod habriot? To get a person to hear on Shabbos? They're coming to shul, and if you don't give them the ability to hear, it's I would imagine it's very difficult to function.
No, and also they totally unlinked to society.
Yeah.
Somebody with that
But
hearing,
that
they just-
overrides Shabbos.
Well, if a overrides rabbinic law of Shabbos, so I'm not sure what the technology involved in. It's possible, in general, technology, electricity. Hard to suggest that it's really a biblical issue. It's a rabbinic issue.
So if it's a rabbinic, and it's already a question of where it falls on.
Right.
I understand.
Right. We had a story here. I'll tell you an interesting story. Let me just put Mike. Where's Michael? I lost him. Let's put it back on the screen. 1 second. Don't worry, Mike. Whoever's there, we didn't lose you. There's Michael. Who else is there? Someone else is there. TJ is there also. Okay. So we had a story here about 7 or 8 years ago. We had this florist do some flower arrangements on high holidays at the front of shul. And one of the things they did was they had a vase with water, and they put some goldfish. I don't know if you remember. There was some goldfish in the water there. Okay. And so day 2 of Rosh Hashanah, right? It's already quite a few hours that thing's been set up, and there's these big branches sitting in there, and the water's getting all murky, and evidently the fish were not having a very pretty time. There was some movement still, but they were not having a very good time. And there was a lady who is a very caring lady, particularly to animals, and she looks out for these things, and she was very bothered by it. And I remember after davening, she insisted. She went over to start to take out the fish into a bowl because she wanted to put them in a safer place.
to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
And there was a person who, those kinds of people who like to blow their horns and put out there how righteous they are, perhaps in front of everybody else at least, but they don't necessarily know much, or at least know how much they're supposed to know. And he didn't. He from the other end of the room, he barked, he screamed, "No, you can't do that. It's Yom Tov, it's Muktzah, you can't touch it." You just shamed somebody, and that's a biblical violation. And I want to tell you what the Gemara says about shaming somebody. Although you go ahead and do what you need to do.
So what does a rabbi do in that situation?
I told her to continue to do what she needs to do. Do what she's doing. Saving the fish. What do you mean?
Saving a life, right?
Are you a
It's one thing to give your sins to the fish on Rosh Hashanah, but you don't have to kill them also.
Are you a PETA card carrying member?
I do kaparas.
True.
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
So saving a fish is like saving a human being. No, it's the same.
I don't know about that, but
I mean,
if you can save a fish,
but, yeah,
yes. But
saving a
a
life,
human
a
comes before a fish. You know, remember the story a few years ago in that zoo? I forgot where the zoo was, but there was a little child that fell into the enclosure of the gorilla.
Right?
So they killed the gorilla and saved the child.
Yeah.
And the uproar, because that was a very unique specimen of the gorilla. It was one of the last of its kind. How could you kill it? Do you understand this kind of discourse in America? That we were putting the life of the gorilla ahead of the life of the child. And no matter what you said, the mother was negligent. There was just a 2-year-old, whatever, which is all silly Baba mind says because it could happen to any mother. Okay, that's right. But that was a scary time or scary thing to know that people were thinking that way. Now, nothing against gorillas. I love gorillas, and God should bless them all. And sadly, if there's the end of a species or there's extinction, it's very, very sad. But no matter what, a child's life, a human life, always comes before an animal's life.
I'll tell you a story that happened with Michael. Okay, Michael, you listening?
I'm gonna put the camera on.
I am listening. How are you,
Okay.
Mario? Congratulations, by the way, on your grandson.
Thank you. I had a trap of possums in my house. Okay, because I had possums in my house, and it was caught. And the guy was going to come, the possum trapper was going to come. Michael came before him, he took him, and he wouldn't let him kill him. And Michael, I don't know what he did with it. And I was very upset at the time, but it's
Michael, well done. Well done.
You want to know what, Mario? You want to know why I did that?
No.
Okay. One day I'll tell you.
All right, we'll do it after. I want to bring you one more example before we go on. This is another example the Gemara brings. This actually Rashi brings down. According to Rashi, this is the main source of this law that Kavod Abriot overrides Torah law. Not everyone agrees that this is the source, but this is according to Rashi. We have in Devarim the following laws about returning lost items or about helping those that need assistance, right? So look at these two verses. One verse says, "You shall not see your brother's ox or sheep straying, v'hit alamta mehem, and ignore them. Rather, you shall return them to your brother. But if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, you shall bring it into your house, and it should be with you until your brother seeks it, whereupon you shall return it to him." Okay. 3. So you shall do with his donkey, and so shall you do with his garment, so you shall do with his lost article of your brother's, which he has lost and you have found it. You shall not ignore it. Now, the truth is, you read this, and it mostly makes sense. In other words, I've underlined two things over here. Here it says you shall not ignore it. Here it says you do ignore it. Right? But
You shall not see your brothers and ignore it.
okay. So that is
You're not
the
supposed to ignore it.
you shouldn't see it and ignore it. That is the correct way. However, if you read the original verse in the Hebrew, it does sound a bit sticky. It's not as smooth as this translation. So the Gemara asks, what's going on over here? It could have worded it better. You shall not ignore it here, you shall ignore it there. Like it could be consistent in the language. So the Gemara says, based on this, that there are generally you're not supposed to ignore. If you find a lost item, you find something of someone else, even if it's something you don't like, you have to always return it. But there are exceptions. There are cases where you should ignore it or you may ignore it. And what's an example? The Gemara says if you have a big Talmud Chacham, a very prominent person, and it's unbecoming of them to rummage in the pile of whatever and pick up this thing in the street and have to start to run around town and look for the owner. It's just not a respectable thing for that person. It's below their dignity, so to speak. So then they don't have to. They're not obligated to return it. Now, so that's a bit hard for us to think about. We would think that the Talmud Chacham would be the first one who wants to do the mitzvah. But you can think of an example where, let's say, somebody is being honored, they're giving a big speech, they have a very high position, they see item there. For the honor of the audience, almost, let them continue doing what they're doing and not go ahead and pick up that item. So there are cases, in such a case, that you're protecting the kavod of the person, the kavod of the tzibur. There are cases that it's the job of others to do. It's not the job of this person to do. And that, by the way, returning the lost item is a biblical law, so that would be a source to seem to suggest that kavod habriyot overrides biblical law. There are others who argue against Rashi and say it's only that case that the Torah talks about, but it's not a blanket, broad teaching for all biblical law. Anyhow, it's a very important idea because I think we come across it pretty often when we're kavod habriyos. Tell you a story. What was the story? It was a story at the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe's Seder table. Often Hasidim used to come and be guests at his Seder table. And the practice of Hasidim is not to eat gebracht on Pesach, which means we don't allow the matzah to come in contact with any water or anything that has a water substance, even if it's wine or other things which may have some water in it. We keep the matzah away. There was once a Yid who was not a big Chassid, and he had found his way. He wanted to come be part of the Seder and hear and see how the Frierdiker Rebbe practices the Seder. And he didn't know the meaning of Hasidim, so he took his matzah and he dipped it into wine. And the Hasidim humiliated him, and they pounced on him, and they screamed at him, and they shamed him in public. And he turned red. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, matzah turning red is a minhag, a chumrah, a stringency, right? But turning a person's face red is a biblical violation.
We have a lot to learn.
We do. One more story on this because it's such a powerful concept. I may have some of the details of the story wrong, but I remember hearing it. So there was a person in Israel who had a baby girl, and they were making a big kiddush in their home. After the davening, they invited the whole community. And the wife, who just had a baby, but a wife and her mother and her sisters, they all worked very, very hard to prepare this kiddush. And one of the things that they prepared was, that you can make these, you go to restaurants sometimes and they make these balls out of bread. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like for onion soups or those kinds of things. Yeah. Okay. So they made, I think, cups out of bread. And I guess the idea was that if you're going to come to make kiddush, you're going to make kiddush in a bread cup. Very fancy, very nice, right? It came out. Now they didn't have the money to cater, and they made it themselves. They stayed up a whole Wednesday night, a whole Thursday night, slaving away to make it for the community, right? So when the people came there, all the wise Alex always know better. It's a big problem when you think your Torah is more important than you lose human sensitivity. It's a very, very big problem. And that's the whole concept over here. So they came and they made a big thing. We can't make kiddush. We can't eat over here. Why? Because the halacha says that when you're making kiddush, you have to cover the challah. And why is that? What's the reason? So the Shulchan Aruch says, so as not to shame the challah.
Challah has prominence over the wine.
Generally, but here we're making kiddush before the challah, so we chose to do this mitzvah over that mitzvah. We don't want to shame the challah, so cover it up and then make kiddush so the challah doesn't see what you're doing, and then later you'll open up the challah again. That's the law. Here they have a problem. Not only we're not covering the challah, we're making the kiddush in the challah. Right? How shameful for the challah. So we said we can't make kiddush, and they started to make a big scene, and it became like a very uneasy.
Was there a cup in the challah or just the wine in the challah?
Yeah.
It's the ultimate thing you're trying to prevent happening.
So all these big machers, it was a whole scene. It was chaos. And the rabbi walked in maybe 20 minutes later. He came a bit late, and he's like, "You guys haven't started. What's going on?" They came over to the rabbi and said, "There's a big problem. We can't eat here because we can't make kiddush because we can't pour the wine into the challah because we're not covering the challah." The whole thing. The rabbi was a clever guy. He was he knew his Torah. He said, "Are you out of your minds? Chutzpah. Do you know how much shame you are putting on the mother, her mother, the sisters who worked for hours to prepare this kiddush? Their shame you don't care about. A challah shame is important, but a human shame is even more important. Go ahead and make kiddush.
Nice.
But how? You are 1,000% right. But where's the line?
No human should be humiliated.
Well,
no
that's
matter
the
what.
topic over here. Where's kavod briot? Right? That's obviously there's a halachic topic there. But I think a lot of the time that we come across these experiences I've been describing, the line is very clear. If somebody
He's gonna suffer, right?
if somebody tapped into the true wisdom of Torah, the wisdom of Torah is, of course, its laws, but there's a larger context to the laws. Kavod abris being one of those things. And when you get the perspective of Torah on life, the answers often are very simple. But I think oftentimes the person can study a lot of Torah, but not get Torah's perspective on life. It's a big difference. It's a big, big difference between studying Torah and getting Torah's perspective.
That's like seeing the trees but not the forest type of thing.
Yes. Okay, let's continue. Gufa, page 208. Gufa. So, what does the word gufa mean? What's guf? Body. So, gufa Aramaic. We're going back to the body. In other words, we're quoting something that was mentioned earlier. Gufa, we mentioned earlier, talking about the status we were mentioning. We talked about walled cities and unwalled cities and villages, right?
Are we off the last
Okay.
topic?
So, yeah. So for the past.
Are you confused? This is the Megillah. Okay, I just want to know. We're finished with the
so
shaming.
we're finished with the demons, and we're finished with Joshua, and we're finished with Avodah, we're finished with shaming, we're finished with Mace Smith, we're finished all that.
Okay. I just.
And now I'm going back to more simple stuff, going back to our Mishnah.
Okay.
Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, we already studied this earlier, we quoted this. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said that when you have a krach, you have a walled city, what's included, and the walled city reads Megillah on the which date? 15th, yeah. So the law is v'chol hasamach loy, v'chol hanira loy, meaning any city that is near the walled city, or any city that is visible from the walled city. Nidar kakrach is assumed, is judged, is considered like a walled city as well, meaning even a city that's outside of the walled city, but it can be seen from the walled city, or it's next to the walled city, is also like a walled city, and you read on the 15th. Okay? Why the two expressions, whether it's samach loy, near the walled city, or nira loy, or visible from the walled city? Why two expressions? Because you could have one without the other. Tana, because it was taught about this, you could have samach, you could have a city being near the walled city, af b'she'ein nira, but not visible from the walled city. Or you could have nira, you could have a city that's visible from the walled city, af b'she'ein samach, but it's not near the walled city. Could you think of an example in each category? So the Gemara tries to think this through. I can understand, like where you can have a city that is visible from the walled city, but not near the walled city. Mashka, we can find such a case. Could go in, for example, the Yasa Beresha Har. There's a city on top of a mountain. Right, I'm here in the walled city, so you don't really see much outside the city. But a small village top of the mountain, I see it. So it's not near me, it's far away, top of the mountain, but I see it. So that has the law of a walled city as well. That reads on the 15th. Remember, we explained that they're very dependent on the walled cities, and they come for commerce and they come for a lot of things. But what about the other case? A city that's near a walled city but not visible from the walled city. What's the case for that? Can anyone think of a case? It's such a big question. Huh?
The opposite. If
The what?
If the whole city is on a mountain, or the other city is down in.
Very good. I think the answer is obvious, and I don't know why they go. Yeah. Amar Rabbi says, it's in the valley. It's right near. Now, obviously, not a valley that's like. Actually, I don't think it's the walled city on top of a mountain and the valley is far away. We're trying to say that the valley is right nearby,
Right.
but it's a little lower, and you cannot see it. Correct.
We can't see it, but they know they're there.
Yes. So that's just fleshing out that teaching. Next teaching. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, the same author. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Krach shiyashav ulevasei chukaf. Okay, let's define a walled city. What if a city is it first walled and then inhabited with homes? or first he built homes and then he walled the city? Which one's called a walled city? So you never thought about that one, huh?
No.
Because you think something's obvious. Define the walled city how you always thought about it till now.
I always thought as a walled city is it's like a development, but a big one.
So
You're
what came
gonna
first, the walls or the homes?
The homes.
No, the walls because you want to protect the city.
So you
So
designed it that way.
you put the
What?
wall
You
first.
design the wall and then put
And
then
then
put the homes in
and
there.
then you
But
have
if
an
you have a house that
entrance.
says, "Oh, we need to wall this thing," then it's not a wall city.
Oh,
Well,
What if it was more peaceful when the homes were built and they didn't need to guard themselves? Then all of a sudden there came a time when, now
it
there's
could be
renters,
originally they
you know,
didn't plan on it, and later they
trying
wanted to
kill.
build,
We gotta
right?
Build a wall.
Yeah.
Well, we should follow the same rule that we've been following since. Like, what was it a city? We should look at the examples of the cities that were built at the time of Joshua.
Ah.
Because then you'll whether.
Okay. And do we know anything about them?
We don't know. Maybe the Gemara is going to bring the order.
So it could be that would be a very logical way to go about it, but it could be we actually have no knowledge. There was no history.
Up until now,
Records.
we've only considered a walled city if it was walled at the time of Yeshua.
Right, but the question is, how were they walled, before or after the homes were built?
But does
We don't
that
know.
That's a difference.
So Rabbi Shua Levi teaches, Krach Sheyoshav, a city that first was inhabited with homes, Ulavasayf Hokaf, and only at the end they decided to wall it. Nidlik and Kfar, it has the law of a village, meaning it is not. Because we have to be careful with our words over here. Just want to take a step back for a moment. We generally have three words. Krach was the walled city, Ir was the regular city, unwalled city, and Kfar was the village. So the Krach walled city was the 15th, the Ir, the regular city, unwalled city, was the 14th, and the Kfar always read either the 14th or on an earlier day, Monday or Thursday prior, up until the 11th. But that's the literal law of those words. But we're going to be using those words a little bit loosely over here. When a walled city was first built with homes and then had a wall, it has the law of a kfar. What does it mean, the law of a kfar? If you look at the notes at the bottom, I think there's an argument about this. The Rambam maintains that such a city is not treated like a village, rather like a large town, which means it reads on the 14th. Others, however, say that the city is treated like a village in every respect, and that means it reads earlier if necessary. So we're not sure what that word
is Jerusalem? Because the walls were later, right?
I don't know. I mean, there were parts of the walls added later, but the original walls.
I thought the walls were at the time of the Second Temple, right?
No, they
Okay,
were.
but those were when. Okay, you're asking a different question, because those were replacement walls. What happens when, let's say, you have walls first, then homes, then the walls gets destroyed, and then you rebuild the walls? So the new walls were built after the home, but the original walls were before the home. What's the law? It's actually going to come up later.
When was it? When Joshua conquered. That's what we learned.
Yeah, I don't know.
Why is it being
So
complicated?
I think that's a really good idea. Apparently, we don't have historical records about that. That's what it looks like. We went to City Hall and we asked them, how did this thing come about?
There was a fire in City Hall.
There was a fire in City Hall.
Yeah, the records are
All the documents were lost.
Yeah.
We honestly don't know. We don't know about the zoning. We don't know
The
about
computer crashed.
By the way, that's what happened with mine.
the what.
There was a fire
So
in this,
Yeah.
in that area.
so what? So there's no
No records for
plans, no record, nothing. Really?
Yeah.
It's just your house, or it's a lot of homes?
No, the whole area.
The whole area.
Yeah,
Here in that place?
Yeah.
Your old house also has the same thing.
the same thing, yeah.
There's no.
Where was it? Unincorporated date or not unincorporated?
Already. Yeah.
I love those stories. There was a fire.
Mhm.
Some really good
I wanted to
developer.
make an addition.
Some really good developer knew what he was doing. Okay, let's continue. What's the time? Oh, I want to just, if you have 5 more minutes, because I want to explain this last passage. So we just said that the walls have to be before the homes. If it's homes and then walls, it's not considered a walled city. What's the proof for that? There's not a historical proof, but there's a Torah proof. What's the Torah proof? My time, what's the reason? Because it says in a pasuk in Vayikra, V'ish ki yimker beis moishav ir choyma. When a person will sell a home in a walled city. I'm going to explain that law in a moment. Well, let's stop for a moment and explain that law. It's a very interesting psukim in the portion of Bahar, not one that we pay a lot of attention to, but let's read through this. There's a 3 psukim in Vayikra. Actually, I have a second copy. Yeah. When a man sells a residential house in a walled city, its redemption may take place until the completion of the year of its sale, meaning the seller can buy it back. Its period of redemption shall be a full year, and if it's not purchased back within that year, then it stays in the possession of the buyer. If it's not redeemed by the end of a complete year, then that house which is in the city that has a wall shall remain permanently the property of the one who purchased it throughout his generations. It will not leave his possession in the Jubilee. So let's take a step back. Generally, we know that there was ancestral land. Right. So therefore, ancestral land meant that if you sold your home, your land to somebody else, technically it's up to a 49-year sale.
Long-term lease. It's not a
Like a long-term lease, basically. Because by the Yovel year, all land was supposed to be returned to its original ancestral owners
Could have
in
been
Israel.
5-year, 10-year, whatever.
Yeah, depending where you're holding in the cycle. If it's 2 years before Yovel, it's a 2-year lease. And that, by the way, played into the market value of land.
Right.
It was all about how long can you still have it
So he
for.
was respected.
Yeah, it had to be. When there was a Sanhedrin court that was governing these things, yes. But even in Israel today, it's all, I think, 99-year leases. There's no such thing as buying homes in Israel. Anyone know?
I've heard something
It's
about that.
communist country. No private property. Yeah, I think till today. At least some places in Israel for sure. Okay. But houses in open cities which do not have a wall surrounding them are to be considered as the field of the land, and may have redemption and shall leave the purchased possessions in the Jubilee.
Is this straight from the Torah?
Okay, so I'll just give you briefly. There's an interesting law. There's 3 categories of land property. There's a home inside a walled city, a home outside a walled city, and land. And land is its own category, but land is generally outside a walled city. You don't really have land inside a walled city. Right, land is open agricultural farming land.
So a house doesn't sit on land?
Outside of a walled city. That's an important point, actually. So the law says, if I sell you my home inside the walled city, so the law says I have up until 1 year to renege on the sale, and I can buy it back. If after the first year I don't buy it back, then inside the walled city, the home is yours and stays yours for generations. It does not return back to my family at the Yovel. If I sell a home outside of a walled city, so the law is that for the first 2 years, I cannot buy it back. After 2 years, I can buy it back. And if I don't buy it back by Yovel, it will come back to me.
It's a bad deal to buy outside, huh?
Huh?
You can come back anytime and take it back from you.
It's a lease.
But that you
Yeah, but
distinguish
they have to-
the one before you
Yeah,
said
sure.
1 year, the other one was 2 years.
Inside the walled city, you have only 1 year to buy it back. And after that, you can't buy it back anymore.
And outside it's 2 years.
You can only
No,
start to buy it back after 2 years.
Like, so the first 2 years, you can buy it back.
No, but it's just interesting that one is 1 year and the other one's 2 years.
And the land.
Yes. And then the law is if I sell land, then the Torah is not clear about land. It just says that the home in the walled, outside of the walled city is to be considered like the land. So what happens there? By land, the law is, I'm trying to remember now. You have only a certain amount of time to buy it back, like the house inside the walled city, but it still will get returned to you in the walled city. Basically, what's this whole distinction? So the Ramban, Nachmanides, has a very important explanation of this whole concept. And he says there's a difference between a person selling their home or selling land. Why is a person selling? So back in those days, for sure, you were selling because you ran into a dire financial situation. You needed funds. Okay? So you're selling. So there's a difference between a person selling their home or a person selling land. A person selling their home is a loss of dignity. I have no funds.
I can't maintain
my lifestyle, so I'm selling my home at loss of dignity. A person selling the land is a loss of income.
But isn't income dignity also?
With your house?
A house doesn't generate income. A house is not an asset. A house is a liability.
You're such a homeowner.
Trust me, a huge liability.
What are you doing?
The house that I live in is a liability. The house that I have Airbnb, that's an asset. My home's not making any money. It's draining money. I mean, if I look at the market, it looks pretty.
If
But
you sell it to make money.
Is it
But
close
until
by? I
then,
need
you're
a place
losing
for
Lots.
Pesach to
Yeah.
my parents.
okay, so he explains that's the whole key over here. That a person who sells their home, so they ran into a tough situation. It was a loss of dignity. You don't have a home anymore. So if you have it up to a year, if you can find funds, you could buy it back. But if after a year you didn't buy it back, the assumption is you found another home. And you found where to be. And you sort of rebuilt your life. So then there's no need to give you the option to buy it back away from the buyer. Versus land is different. Okay, we're not going to go into all that right now. It's late. But I just want to point out what the Gemara is pointing out over here. The Gemara is saying that when the Torah discusses the law about selling this house, it says when you'll sell Bet Moshav, the house of dwelling, Ir Choma, in the walled city. What does that imply? That it's a house of a walled city, meaning the city was walled before the home was built. From the language of the Torah, it implies that the house was built after the city was already walled. And from here, the Gemara learns that a walled city means first the walls were put up and then the houses were built. Now, what is this law regarding? This law that tells you that a walled city is only a walled city if the walls are built first and then the house was built after. According to Rashi over here, it's only a law about what the Torah is talking about the law of sale of homes. It's not a law of Purim. It wouldn't be a criteria for a walled city for Purim. It's just a criteria for a walled city with regards to the home sales.
Also for Purim doesn't matter.
Correct. Others argue with Rashi and say, if the Gemara, why is Rabbi Shmuel even bringing it over here? It must be because of the discussion of Purim. And therefore they say this law applies to Purim. And if it's a walled city, but the walls were built after the home was built, then it would not be considered a walled city on Purim. That's the argument over here.
So according to them, Yerushalayim must have been built that way.
According to that opinion, we must say Yerushalayim had the walls came before the homes. According to Rashi, it could have been the other way around. It could have been the homes were after the walls were after the homes, and it wouldn't make a difference regarding Purim. It only makes a difference regarding home sales in the portion of Bahar. Correct. Shoin. You became a little clever tonight.
Interesting. Very interesting.